Folks, Lou, as we'll call him, Louis, has been charged. That's right. Now, New York prosecutors used a terrorism law in the charges against Luigi Mangione. Yes, that's right. New York prosecutors are using a 9/11 era anti-terrorism law in their case against the man charged with gunning down United Healthcare CEO outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel. Luigi Mangione was indicted on charges of murder as an act of terrorism under a state law that allows for stiffer sentences when a killing is aimed at terrifying civilians or influencing government. If it sounds like an unusual application of a terrorism law, it's not the first time the statute has been applied to a case that wasn't about cross-border extremism or a plot to kill masses of people. Mangione is charged with first-degree and second-degree murder counts that specifically refer to a New York law that addresses terrorism. Essentially an add-on to existing criminal statutes, it said that an underlying offense constitutes a crime of terrorism if it's done with intent to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a unit of government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a unit of government by murder, assassination, or kidnapping. If a defendant is convicted, the crime of terrorism designation boosts the underlying offense to a more serious sentencing category. For example, an assault normally punishable by up to 25 years in prison would carry a potential life sentence. Now, of course, as they print out here, Mangione would face a possible life sentence if convicted. New York does not have the death penalty. The state's highest court threw out a capital punishment law in 2004. So he's being charged with murder. He's not going to get 25 years. He's going to get life in prison. Now, what this says here is that the statute calls for a longer sentence if you're convicted of terrorism, if that is attached to a crime that is not murder, that would not necessarily land you life in prison. Like, for example, if the FBI does a sting operation and frames you for trying to do something that you had no intention of doing that wouldn't result in loss of life, they will give you a higher minimum sentence if they attach this terrorism law to it. In this case, it does not affect the sentencing at all because you're going to get life in prison if you're convicted anyway, which means this really isn't about him. This is about us. This is about keeping the public in line, because they are adding this terrorism charge because of the influence that the killing had on the public.
Right.
That's why they're doing it. So here's Alvin Bragg explaining this, which I'm waiting for Matt Walsh's tweet about how Alvin Bragg is charging him like this because he's a white man. You know, I mean, haven't seen it yet. Haven't seen it yet.
Frightening, well-planned, targeted murder that was intended to cause shock and attention and intimidation. It occurred in one of the most bustling parts of our city, threatening the safety of local residents and tourists alike, commuters and business people just starting out on their day.
Not at that time of the morning.
Let me say a bit more about the charges.
That's the thing. That's not true, as we'll get to later. It was very early in the morning. Yeah, none of that's true, which we have actually, don't take it from us, one of CNN's top legal people that they go to bring on actually says that in a minute.
They include one count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional. The maximum penalty possible for murder in the first degree and murder in the second degree as an act of terrorism is life without parole. The maximum penalty for murder in the second degree is 25 years to life.
Again, the sentencing is neither here nor there. He's going to get life in prison if he is convicted anyway. All right. So the way this is structured, it's kind of an Axios format. Where did this law come from? State lawmakers passed it in 2001, 6 days after the September 11th attacks, saying the state needed legislation that is specifically designed to combat the evils of terrorism and that wasn't just for federal courts. Then State Senator Michael Balboni, who was among the law's leading proponents, recalls pointing out that many cases could come via state and local enforcement officers who far outnumbered federal agents in New York. Many other states passed similar laws around the same time, and Congress approved the Patriot Act. Okay, so here's the segment that I just referred to. There's a woman, I think her name is Susan Schneider. I forget her first name. I know that's her last name. She is sort of, one of the legal experts that CNN goes to. She is a defense attorney. And so we're going to see her take on this terrorism charge. We're going to see her explain why it's not likely to hold.
I really want to point out here, which is highly unusual, and it's my opinion that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has a bit overreached in this indictment. They were originally going to go forward with a murder 2 charge against Luigi Mangione, which is just having the defendant having the intent to cause death of another human being and the defendant being the cause of that death. They've now gone forward and enlisted this terrorism component to a murder 1 indictment, which means they presented evidence in front of the grand jury, which is a group of 24 people from the community, without a judge in place, just a district attorney and a group of 24 grand jurors who hear evidence. It is undoubted, or I believe that the DA presented that alleged manifesto to try to get this terrorism charge added on as murder 1, but they're going to have a harder time proving that in court for one reason, and I'll make it fast. This victim was shot in the back of the head, not in the front of the head, on a quiet sidewalk early in the morning in the dark, and it doesn't appear from a defense attorney's perspective that this was intended to be a terroristic type of murder.
So one other thing I want to ask is just I want you to take a listen from moments ago. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Let's roll that tape.
1 count of murder in the first degree as a killing in furtherance of terrorism. 2 counts of murder in the second degree. 1 charging that the killing was done as an act of terrorism, and the second pertaining to the fact that the killing was intentional.
So, Stacey, you think a defense attorney would disagree with that and with what Shimon laid out, that the prosecution will explain is that because he was targeted, Mr. Thompson, for being a CEO of a health insurance company, and this does appear to be politically motivated in a sense, but you disagree with those charges, or you think a defense attorney would take issue?
I think his defense attorney is going to definitely take issue at trial. They may even move to dismiss the top count of murder 1, and that would be Karen Agnifilio, because arguing this was a terroristic act when he was on a quiet street in the dark shooting a victim in the back of the head and then intending to influence the whole world about the insurance industry was an unintended consequence of this murder. No one expected the social media outpouring, the disturbing social media outpouring from this act, and to have the district attorney and law enforcement from New York mention that there was a social media outcry in relation to a terroristic act is putting the cart before the horse. I mean, the murder happened first, the outcry was second, and totally unpredictable.
Okay, so I would disagree slightly with the fact that with the statement that it was unpredictable. I wouldn't say it was unpredictable, but I generally agree with what she's saying, that you are basically taking the reaction to the crime and therefore assigning a certain implication to the crime itself based on the public reaction to it. And can you prove that that was foreseeable? Can you attach it to that crime in that way? So what this really is, this is an attempt to control the conversation that has gotten out of hand. Mm-hmm. And as someone who makes their living on social media, I can tell you that when someone is declared a terrorist, there are specific rules as to what you can and cannot say about them on platforms like Facebook, like YouTube, where the conversation is happening, which means we now have to be much more careful about how we talk about this. Otherwise, they can put us out of business. I was watching Jordan Sheridan's segment about this the other day. Every 3 minutes, he's putting in the disclaimer, we do not condone vigilante violence. So we have to put that disclaimer in as well. We have to say now, we do not condone vigilante violence, just like Jimmy has to say stuff about the vaccine when he talks about this. Like, you have to put certain disclaimers now when you talk about this, because now that this is elevated to a case of terrorism, there are stricter rules on the platforms where the conversation is happening. They want to censor the conversation. They want to stifle the conversation. That is why they are charging him with this, because they want to control what we are allowed to say about it. And they want to be able to punish people who say the wrong thing about it. And that is what this is about. This is about punishing the public for reacting badly in their mind to this event, this tragic event, which we do not condone. See how this is going to work now? And it sounds funny. I'm not joking. I'm not joking. They can fuck you up if you say the wrong thing about this now that there's a terrorism charge.
Yes, there are rumors that he might get a pardon from Trump, and if RFK goes down, take over Health and Human
Health and
Services.
Human Services, right.
Yeah, obviously this is an elite class terrified of the reaction to this. It was one of the clearest examples yet of something a lot of people have been warning about for a very long time. I remember reading an article. It was written not very long before the pandemic, which makes it even more prophetic, where the person said, you cannot have this level of inequality without it destabilizing society. It always does. If you look at any other example of a country that had this kind of grotesque wealth inequality, it causes social instability. And the writer said, something's going to happen. There's going to be a war. There's going to be something unpredictable that really accelerates it. And this was, as I said, it was written not long before the pandemic. So that was a very, very I thought it was insightful at the time, even more so in hindsight. This was one of the first open examples of a return to kind of urban guerrilla actions. Obviously, he acted alone. He's not part of a group like the Weather Underground or the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Right.
I think you will see a return of groups like that. And it goes back to the old JFK saw. People who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Are we going to have a real revolution? Honestly, we always want to tell you what we really think here. I think this country is more likely to have a fascist revolution than a socialist one. I would like to tell you otherwise, but that's what I think. The system as it exists is not sustainable. It's going to tip into something else. And as it does, you're going to see a lot of incidents like this.
Well, that's kind of what Jordan was saying too. Why he said, he put a little meat on the bones of why he doesn't condone it, because he says the response to it will be so fascistic that, yeah, what you're going to have is a civil war that ends up in a fascist revolution if there is one. That's why the more productive way to do things is obviously through building mass movements and through civil disobedience, which we condone because that is safe and legal to condone, right? And this is how the conversation gets policed. This is how your First Amendment gets undermined. This is what they wrote the Patriot Act for. They wrote the Patriot Act to undermine the First Amendment post 9/11. And they used the Patriot Act to do that. This is a Patriot Act era law. This law was passed 6 days after 9/11 that they're now pulling out of the shelf when they need it, just like they will to anyone whenever they need it. And so you could see that coming. And part of what I'm talking about is a poll like this. Now, we give the boomers a lot of grief on this show, and I want to give the boomers credit because this is one issue where they're, of course, absolutely right. Net favorability of Luigi Mangione. Among 18 to 25-year-olds, Luigi Mangione has a plus 9% favorability rating. Horrible. 30 to 44, it's about tied. 45 to 64, he has a negative 35% favorability rating.
What's going on with my people?
And yeah, well, and the boomers, as you can see, just absolutely correct on this yet again. Absolutely right about this. And this led Eric Adams to question, hey, what's with the young people?
The shooter, Ivy League, grew up in an affluent household. His manifesto clearly is showing some signs of hating. Our children are being radicalized. I said this over and over.
He's a hater.
Everybody's like, what are you talking about, Eric? Our children are being radicalized to hate the America, to hate the country that put them where they are. This.
Okay, that says it right there. To hate the country that put them where they are. Yeah, they are where they are. That's why they hate the country. The country that put them where they are, where they can't afford to buy a car, they can't afford to rent an apartment, they can't afford to have children. They'll never afford to buy a house. You know, the median age now for first-time home buyers up to 56.
Yep.
You don't even get to buy a house until you're almost out of the workforce. You can't even buy a house until you're almost out of the workforce now. So this is where they are. This is where they are. That's why they hate the country, because the country has put them where they are.
Crippling student loan debt.
Crippling student loan debt. Yeah, exactly. That explains it. This country's put them where they are, and they're so ungrateful. Yeah, where are they? Where are they? You answered your own question.
No health care.
That's right.
I said, hey, you know, because I've thought about going upstate, buying a house. My biggest hesitation, honestly, is healthcare. You know, like, hey, what's the point of building anything in a country where they'll take all your shit if you get sick?
Yep.
What's the point of it?
Yep. That's right.
This person had all that one wants to have, but he hated everything to the point of shooting someone. And we better deal with the radicalization of our young people. And, you know, people could, you know, they could complain that I'm saying it, but I'm seeing it. I'm seeing our bench is hating the team. And we better start acknowledging and focusing on that. And so having dance parties, celebrating the death of someone, I don't support that.
You should. What you should take more issue with is the fact that your city and your party, and more broadly speaking, your country, has put young people in a position where a reaction to an event like this was very predictable, contrary to what the CNN lawyer said. That's the only piece of that I think she got wrong, is that I could have seen this coming. Maybe not in the volume, but I could certainly see the reaction to this coming a mile away, and that is because of the desperation that people feel after years and years of political failure. And it is almost entirely the Democrats who I blame for this, not because the Republicans are better than the Democrats, but because Republicans don't pretend to be better than the Democrats. The Republicans never wanted to fix our healthcare system. The Democrats acted like they did, and they didn't. Barack Obama ran on a public option. Obamacare ended up being a Heritage Foundation, Romney Care healthcare plan. And then when the guy ran who was going to take it to the next level, they said, no, this Heritage Foundation healthcare plan is the final stage of healthcare reform in this country, and we can only strengthen it, whatever that means. They still haven't strengthened it. I don't know what they mean by strengthened it. It's the same policy that it was in 2009. That has led people to nihilism. Yes.
Biden ran saying he would veto Medicare for all.
Medicare for all.
His desk.
Right. So, again, as an observation, not as an endorsement, what is the JFK quote? When you make peaceful revolution impossible, you make violent revolution inevitable. This is the result of political failure. And it is mostly political failure at the hands of the Democratic Party. And you're the mayor of New York City. You're the mayor of New York City, man. This is one of the most unequal cities in the country. I think San Francisco, LA, and New York, they trade places.
Credit card debt in America.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. New York, LA, San Francisco, they kind of trade places, I guess, as number one. But those are the top three. And this is what happens when politics fails. And rather than chide young people for having this reaction, why don't you ask yourself why? Ask yourself why. It's as simple as that. These are questions that the political class simply will not ask themselves. And part of this terrorism charge is to suppress conversation. Because once you go there, now you have the Patriot Act laws that you can pull out of the deck when you need them. Now social media companies have specific rules set up when you're talking about terrorism, right? As opposed to just a crime of an ordinary nature. And so that's what this is about. That's what this is about. They are going. Look, this is really a free speech issue at this point, because that's what this charge is really about. This charge is about controlling the conversation. It's not about him. He's getting the same jail time, terrorism charge or no terrorism charge. That's irrelevant. This is about suppressing speech. This is about making the First Amendment irrelevant, which there has been a systemic effort to do really since the passage of the First Amendment. When we covered the Kingston rally, Judge Napolitano went on a great lecture about how the government always they regretted signing the First Amendment from day one. After they signed it, they probably wish they could cross it out and go back. They've been undermining it for centuries, but post 9/11, you've seen an accelerated push to nullify the First Amendment, and the monopolization of big tech is a big part of that, and this is a big part of that as well.
Yes, this has probably scared the shit out of the elite classes more than anything we've seen in many, many years, to have it revealed in such stark terms how much the people, left, right, center, everybody really hates them. And just as October 7th was a masks off moment for podcasters and commentators and so-called thought leaders, this has been another mask off moment. All of a sudden, all of these anti-establishment people, the Barry Weisses, the Matt Walshes, all of a sudden, they're in lockstep with the New York Times op-ed page.
Yep.
They hate the New York Times so much. Oh, those establishment elites. All of a sudden, as soon as this happened, they sound just like CNN. I hope their fans, who very often we do a segment like we did on Elon today, who will always drop into the comments to tell you sound just like CNN. I hope they're saying that to those people. I hope they're pointing out to Ben Shapiro and all these other supposed rescue the Republic radicals and fighters against power. I hope they're pointing out to them that they sound just like the New York Times and CNN, and will maybe consider the idea that anti-woke is just the other side of woke. And they both lead you right back to the same place, supporting CEOs, insurance companies, and Israel.
Please clap.